Imagine this: a doctor, found brutally murdered in her own apartment, her body set on fire to destroy all evidence. It sounds like a crime straight out of a thriller. But this happened in 1907, right in the heart of Chicago. What's even more chilling, the murderer was identified not by evidence, but by the spirit of the very woman he killed. How could a ghost, a mere whisper from beyond the grave, lead investigators to a killer? How is it possible that the soul of the victim played a role in solving her own murder? This is not fiction. It's the mysterious case of Dr. Tericita Basa, a haunting tale that blends the cold logic of crime solving with the unexplainable forces of the supernatural. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear will challenge everything you thought you knew about justice, the paranormal, and the boundaries between life and death. Let's unravel the truth behind this eerie case, and discover how a spirit may have had the final say. On a cold, quiet night in 1907, Dr. Tericita Basa, a respected respiratory specialist in Chicago, was found dead in her own apartment. But this wasn't just another case of violence. What happened to Tericita that night was as chilling as it was baffling. Her body was discovered in a horrific state, burned beyond recognition, the flames attempting to erase all traces of the crime. But here's where things get strange. The police soon realized that the fire wasn't the only thing that had been tampered with. Someone had deliberately hidden her body under a mattress, as though trying to bury the truth. And it didn't stop there. The investigation, initially stalled and without leads, took a shocking turn when a piece of evidence appeared out of nowhere: a torn, partially burned notebook. Inside it were handwritten notes that didn't make sense at first. But the more they looked, the more this bizarre clue became the key to unraveling the case. A simple phrase: "Buy movie tickets for As." A phrase that would soon lead investigators down a path they never expected. This wasn't just a cold-blooded murder, it was a mystery wrapped in layers of intrigue, death, and the supernatural. How did a simple note from a burned notebook hold the truth about a killer? How was the spirit of the victim able to speak, even after her tragic end? As strange as it sounds, the true story behind Dr. Tericita Basa's murder was about to blur the lines between what we think we know and what we fear to acknowledge. Let's dig deeper into the case, and discover how a victim's spirit might have been the only thing that could help solve her own murder. As we move forward, we'll explore the strange and eerie clues that appeared and how the spirit of Dr. Basa played a pivotal role in leading the investigators to the killer. Stay with me as we uncover this chilling chapter in history. For weeks, investigators hit a dead end, despite the gruesome crime scene and the obvious signs of a struggle. They had no concrete leads to follow. No cameras had caught the killer in action. No fingerprints were found, and all the physical evidence seemed to vanish into the smoke of the fire. It felt like the case was destined to remain unsolved. But then something extraordinary happened. Something that most people would dismiss as a mere superstition. Yet, for those involved, it was the key to unlocking the mystery. Remy Tour, a colleague of Dr. Tericita Basa, began to experience something she couldn't explain. Late one night, as she slept, she was awakened by a terrifying dream. In the dream, the ghostly figure of Dr. Basa appeared before her, her eyes filled with desperation. "You need to find who did this to me," the spirit whispered. Remy woke in a cold sweat, her heart racing. But it wasn't just a nightmare. It felt real, and it wasn't the last time. The spirit of Tericita Basa appeared to Remy again, not in her dreams this time, but in the quiet moments of her life. The encounters grew more frequent, with Tericita's spirit speaking to her, urging her to go to the police. It was Alan Safari, the spirit would say, revealing the name of a man who worked with Tericita at the hospital. Remy, terrified but driven by a force she couldn't ignore, told her husband, Hoji, about these strange occurrences. Now, Hoji, initially skeptical of his wife's claims, was soon confronted by a terrifying reality of his own. One night, as they slept, Remy sat up in bed, her voice trembling. But it wasn't her voice anymore. She whispered in a cold, eerie tone, "I am Tericita Basa." Hoji froze, heart pounding as Remy, "No." Tericita proceeded to describe in chilling detail how she was murdered. "He came to fix the TV. But then, he stabbed me and stole my jewelry." Hoji, now terrified, listened as his wife described the crime in a way that only the killer would know. With the name Alan Safari, echoing in his mind. Hoji had no choice but to tell the police. The name wasn't just a clue, it was the breakthrough they had been waiting for. But it wasn't just any clue. It was the kind of clue that comes from somewhere beyond the physical world. A clue so specific, so detailed, that it left no room for doubt. As strange as it was, the evidence was undeniable. Alan Safari, a janitor at the hospital, had been to Tericita's apartment on the night of her death. The police began to investigate Safari's background, finding that he was in dire financial straits and had a history of theft. A pattern emerged, but the most significant piece of evidence had been provided not by a detective or a forensics team, but by the spirit of the very woman who had been killed. But how could a spirit, something so intangible, so unreal, have provided the answers? I'll admit, it's a tough pill to swallow. But when you look at the facts, the chain of events is undeniable. The clues were too specific. The details were too precise. This wasn't just a woman's desperate plea from beyond the grave. It was a chilling revelation. As soon as the name, Alan Safari, was brought to light by Remy's chilling encounters with the spirit of Dr. Tericita Basa, the investigation took a sharp turn. Up until then, the case seemed like an unsolvable mystery. But suddenly, there was a name that would lead detectives down a path filled with uncomfortable truths and unsettling revelations. Alan Safari, a janitor at the hospital where Dr. Basa worked, seemed to be the least likely suspect. On the surface, he was just another man doing a simple, mundane job. He wasn't rich, he wasn't famous, just an ordinary worker trying to get by. But as the investigators began to dig deeper into his background, they uncovered a troubling history. Safari was struggling financially, living paycheck to paycheck. His desperation was growing, and his need for money was becoming more and more apparent. But it wasn't just financial desperation that made Safari a person of interest. The police began to connect the dots between his movements and the night of Dr. Basa's murder. The first clue came from an unlikely source, his whereabouts that night. While there were no security cameras in Dr. Basa's apartment building, Safari's movements were eventually traced through witness testimonies and other sources. He had indeed been at her apartment that night, under the guise of fixing a television. But something about his presence didn't sit right with investigators. Why had he been there at such a late hour? Uninvited? Then came the most damning piece of evidence, the jewelry. After searching Safari's home, police found 2 pieces of jewelry, believed to be Dr. Basa's, hidden in his girlfriend's belongings. A pearl ring and a jade pendant, both of which had been reported missing from Dr. Basa's apartment. When confronted with this, Safari admitted that he had indeed been at Dr. Basa's apartment on the night of her death. He said he had come to fix her TV, but claimed he had left after a short visit. But the timeline wasn't adding up, and there was something about Safari's story that didn't quite make sense. It was then that the police realized he had lied about his whereabouts that night. The small details of his story were inconsistent. It was becoming clearer that Safari was hiding something. Safari's story began to unravel even further during his interrogation. As more evidence surfaced, including forensic evidence suggesting that Dr. Basa had been stabbed before the fire had even started, Safari's initial confession was called into question. He claimed that the police had pressured him into admitting guilt, suggesting that they had threatened to arrest his pregnant girlfriend if he didn't confess. Safari's sudden change of heart was suspicious, and the investigators began to wonder, was he truly guilty? Or was there another explanation? Despite his confession, Safari later tried to retract his statement, claiming he had been coerced into making it. He went on to say that he had been with his girlfriend that night, and then later with a neighbor. But the damage had been done. The forensic evidence, the jewelry, and his own conflicting statements pointed to him as the prime suspect. This case was beginning to take on an even darker tone. Alan Safari was no longer just a janitor caught in a web of lies. He had become the face of an unthinkable crime. The police now had all the pieces of the puzzle. It was clear that Safari was the one who had killed Dr. Basa, yet there was still a haunting question that remained. What had driven him to murder a woman he barely knew? Safari's desperate financial situation could explain his motive, but something about the way he acted after the crime didn't sit right with me. It was almost as if he believed he could get away with it. As though the thrill of committing such a crime gave him a sick sense of control. But, as we'll see in the next part, The most disturbing part of this case wasn't just the crime itself, it was what happened during Safari's trial, where the truth seemed to slip further and further away. As we move forward, we'll take a closer look at the trial that followed, the shocking twists, and how justice, though served, was still shrouded in doubt. Stay with me as we delve deeper into the haunting final chapter of this eerie case. The trial of Alan Safari was nothing short of a spectacle, an unsettling mix of legal proceedings, haunting testimony, and the shadow of superstition hanging heavily over the entire process. What made this case even more chilling wasn't just the crime itself, but the surreal nature of how it all unfolded in the courtroom. At the heart of the trial were the two confessions from Safari. The first was his admission of guilt, where he described, in vivid detail, how he had murdered Dr. Tericita Basa, stolen her jewelry, and set the apartment on fire. But, almost immediately after, Safari began to backtrack, claiming that he had been coerced into making his confession. He insisted that the police had threatened to arrest his pregnant girlfriend if he didn't take the blame. Here's where things get tricky. On one hand, there was the physical evidence, the jewelry found in Safari's girlfriend's possession. Forensic proof that Dr. Basa had been murdered before the fire had even started, and witness testimonies placing him at the scene that night. But on the other hand, there was the fact that Safari was not the only one speaking. The eerie, inexplicable influence of Dr. Basa's spirit weighed heavily on the case. Remy Tour, who had been tormented by visions of Dr. Basa's ghost, was brought in as a key witness. In a chilling turn, she shared details that only the killer would know, such as how Dr. Basa had been stabbed and then set on fire. The prosecution argued that these revelations from Remy, while unsettling, were crucial in piecing together the timeline of events. But the defense pounced on the supernatural angle, suggesting that Remy's testimony was unreliable, driven by her own fears and confusion. After all, how could a spirit really know these details? As the trial went on, it became increasingly clear that the jury was divided. Some members were swayed by the physical evidence, the forensic analysis, the jewelry, the inconsistent stories from Safari. Others couldn't shake the chilling thought that something beyond the physical world had played a part in this case. Was Remy truly hearing the voice of Tericita Basa's spirit? Or was she simply experiencing the psychological strain of a deeply traumatic situation? Safari's defense team focused on discrediting the supernatural claims, arguing that Remy's statements were the product of an overactive imagination. They painted a picture of a woman desperate for closure, perhaps misinterpreting her own emotions and experiences. They argued that the case could not be decided on the basis of ghostly encounters, no matter how compelling they seemed. But despite the doubts raised by the defense, the evidence against Safari was overwhelming. He had confessed, albeit under questionable circumstances, and the forensic evidence confirmed the details of the crime. Still, the jury couldn't ignore the strange, unsettling nature of the case. They deliberated for days, torn between the supernatural elements and the hard facts laid out before them. In the end, the jury couldn't reach a unanimous verdict. They found themselves mired in the ambiguity of a case that seemed to defy all logic and reason. Was it justice, or superstition? Was Alan Safari the true killer? Or had something unearthly played a role in his confession? The trial ended in a deadlock, and soon after, Safari shocked everyone by pleading guilty to the murder of Dr. Basa. Many speculated that his decision to finally admit guilt was influenced by the pressure of the trial, but also by the overwhelming weight of the evidence against him. His sentencing was swift: 14 years in prison for the murder, theft, and arson. But even as Safari sat in prison, the question still lingered: was justice truly served? The verdict seemed almost too lenient, considering the gravity of the crime. And as for the spirit of Tericita Basa, did she get the justice she deserved? Or was her role in this case simply a strange, unsettling anomaly? As we wrap up the trial, let's take a moment to reflect. While Alan Safari was punished for his crime, the lingering sense of unease remains. Could the supernatural really play a role in solving crimes? And what happens when the lines between reality and the unknown blur so completely? Stay with me, because we'll dive into the final chapter of this eerie tale and the questions that still haunt this case. As the dust settled on the trial of Alan Safari, one thing became painfully clear: the case of Dr. Tericita Basa's murder would never be as simple as it appeared. Despite the guilty plea, despite the conviction, there are still questions that remain unanswered. And not just ordinary questions, questions that reach deep into the supernatural. Into the very boundaries of life and death. Was Dr. Basa's spirit truly involved in solving her own murder? Could a ghost communicate from beyond the grave, guiding the investigators toward the truth? The logical part of me wants to dismiss it, to chalk it up to coincidence, to a grieving woman's subconscious mind manifesting something supernatural. But can we really explain away all of the strange details that unfolded? Remy's chilling testimony, the vivid descriptions of the crime scene that only the killer could have known, the haunting presence of a spirit that seemed to intervene at the exact moment when the case was on the brink of collapse. These aren't just random events. And then there's Alan Safari, the man who confessed, but only after first denying his guilt and changing his story. The jewelry found in his girlfriend's possession, the forensic evidence that confirmed Tericita's death occurred long before the fire started, and the strange inconsistencies in his own testimony. These are all solid facts. But what about the supernatural element? Could it have been the catalyst? The push that forced the case to move forward when all other avenues seemed blocked? We have to ask ourselves, how much weight do we give to the inexplicable in a case like this? How much of the truth lies in what we can see and touch? And how much is hidden in the realm of the unseen? Could Tericita's spirit have truly provided the clues that led to her killer? Or was it merely a product of a collective need for closure? Even now, years after the trial, the case of Dr. Tericita Basa continues to haunt those involved. Many of us are left to wonder, was justice truly served? Safari received a relatively light sentence, just 14 years in prison, for the brutal murder of a woman who never had a chance to defend herself. Was that enough for Tericita? Was it enough for the family and friends who mourned her loss? And what about the spirit of Tericita? What does it say about the mysteries of the human soul? About the possibility that death might not be the end of everything? Could the dead have a voice? A way of guiding the living, even after they've crossed over? These questions will likely never have clear answers. But perhaps, in the end, that's what makes this case so compelling and so terrifying. It reminds us that some mysteries, no matter how hard we try, can't be fully explained. Sometimes, the truth isn't something we can hold in our hands. Sometimes, it's something that lingers in the shadows, waiting to be understood, even after the case is closed. As we conclude this eerie tale, I encourage you to reflect on the deeper questions raised by this case. Do you believe in the supernatural? Or is there always a logical explanation behind the most bizarre occurrences? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more chilling mysteries that blur the line between reality and the unknown.